But the joke is also that, when we were in college, Arunava and me, and I presume Dia, the cool kids had guitars and they had bands. Today the cool kids have startups. They have ideas that they want to experiment with. They know how to network and get the financing. They know where the incubators are. That's a big difference between what was the scene even 25, 30 years back. Right? So there is a difference in terms of just expectations, aspirations, and I would say because of technology, tremendous amount of knowledge as well. You do know a lot more than perhaps we did. Now personally, let me tell you, when you say how do you contribute, in the beginning of the pandemic, when we were all holed up in our homes and really wondering whether the world was indeed coming to an end. In India, we did not have regular statistics on how things were looking. And we were all worried. We were looking at the kind of predictions that 50 lakh people would perish. We would have hundreds of millions of infections. Average length of stay in hospitals would increase. And at a time like that, let me tell you, as a complete private citizen, right? I'm sitting in the house like everybody else. I was at that time associated with the Brookings Institution. It's one of the world's largest think tanks. My only tool, which each of us in the room is getting trained as a specialist in something, is data analytics. Right? I have a PhD in economics. I look at data. So I'm sitting at my table and I'm wondering how do I do and what do I make of the situation? Purely for personal reasons. I started just analyzing data. I started calling up AIMS and calling up ICMR. I started haranguing Ministry of Health. I started calling and piecing together a picture of what might be in terms of what empirically the data tells us. And soon it became a daily exercise. We were coding, we were running 2 hours of code, and then actually what takes a considerable amount of time, which we are not very well trained at, communicating it together. So we knew the statistics, but then putting it out on Twitter, which is also a medium which our generation, I think, has now warmed up to, but Instagram and all are still But communicating that with the next generation was very important. And we made that effort. It took us a couple of more hours. Analysis was 1 hour. The communication and tweets usually took 2 hours because you were making... I cannot tell you how fulfilling an exercise that was. Because soon we started, in fact, we got calls from almost every newspaper and media house in the country. Every, regardless of whether you are left-leaning, right-leaning, you love Modi, you hate Modi. They were all calling up to figure out what is happening with the pandemic. And then we started to get calls from most of our ministries and from research institutions, etc. I think each of us have it in us to use the tools that we possess to contribute in whatever little bit, because you can't put a ceiling to what impact it's going to have. If you do it to the best of your ability, you soon find partners. Lots of WhatsApp groups with task forces were set up. Nothing legit, by the way. It was not sanctioned by government, or we just did it because we felt it was required. So you had researchers group, you had doctors group, public health specialists, operations research specialists, all just getting onto WhatsApp. I think each of us can contribute. And another small piece of sort of evidence. I joined the government for the first time in my life. I've never been a government employee. At the age of 47, as a government, the secretary to government. I might be one of the youngest secretaries to government of India. And that just tells you. Of course, for you, we are not you. But it tells you that somewhere the clouds are parting and there is interest in what younger people and experts have to say. So I think sky's the limit.
Absolutely. And you are also on Instagram. So were you to the cool kids when you were in college? Or
say that again?
Were you to the cool kids when you were in college?
You know, I was the president of Economic Association. So it was still economics. I'm terrible at music. But all of that is cool. I think economics is very cool, guys.
Absolutely. And in our generation, you would have been for sure. So now I want to turn to Arunava. He's the founder, CEO of Council on Energy, Environment and Water. He's the reason I'm here today, and in a way why all of us are here today. He's been a mentor to many of us, and he's creating ecosystems that enable us to make a difference. I remember when, as a young student, I first started hearing a lot about climate change. It seemed like this larger than life issue. I went to my father and asked him, what can an ordinary girl like me do about a big problem like climate change? And this is the same question I hear again and again from young people. It seems like this big issue beyond our control. So young people today who want to do something about climate change, what can we do?
Thank you, Prachi. It's so exciting to be on this panel with all of you rock stars. Resident Cool is perhaps the takeaway message for the day. But Prachi, I used to be in my school band.
I can give it to you also.
All my bandmates are now professional rock stars. So I was the least cool of them all. So hence I run a think tank. So I think what the question you have posed is, I would flip it around. It's not about what can a young person do to deal with such a complex issue. The problem is the issue is of course complex, but we've not broken it down into agency. So in my anniversary letter to the team yesterday, I said, you've got to get familiar or comfortable with non-linearity. What I mean by this is that when we think about climate change, the past is no longer predictable of the future. Right? So you can analyze data, as Shamika is saying, the last 50 years, and you know how bad things have gotten, and yet that is not a predictor of how bad things will get. Equally in the opportunity side, right? There are step changes in our economic paradigms, in our life chances, as Shamika was reflecting, what a college student would be doing 25 years ago versus now. But there's another dimension to this. And that, the linear way of thinking, is that the problem is so complex that we've got to gather in halls like this, wear a suit, and debate into midnight for commas and full stops in a negotiation document, and then hope that those 2 weeks of negotiations will translate into 50 weeks of action. This is the paradigm that we've inherited. I was in grade 9 when the Rio Convention was signed. I still remember making a school chart about this. And I still remember using the phrase, Rio Conventions, pipe dream question. Something in this 14-year-old head was also that this can't be the way. So the non-linearity is, why don't we focus on 50 weeks of action to influence 2 weeks of negotiations rather than the other way? Therefore, what you do with your startup on mapping personal footprint, or someone does with a satellite-based startup which is looking at better calculations of emissions, or someone is looking at the circular economy of water so that you're reducing both the energy required in pumping water, but you're also extracting the minerals and increasing the fertilizer output, etc. Or someone looking at the distributed energy systems so that you're not again looking at a linear way of someone's generating power, someone's transmitting it, and someone is just passively using it. In every aspect of our economic life as economic agents, we've got to get familiar and comfortable with non-linearity. And that's when we begin to internalize the challenges we are facing, but also begin to understand that there are opportunities that might not be written down, but it's certainly something that you can come up with. So just as some examples, right? I mentioned earlier our team of just under 330 people, a median age of 29.72. Right? 14 years we maintained this. Let me go back 10 years ago. One of my now senior colleagues joined as an intern in January 2014. I gave her a homework. I said, I don't understand the solar irrigation business. Why don't you do something? And she worked and looked at the data, looked at electricity subsidy rates state by state by state, and then came up with a model on how you can actually have solar irrigation in a manner that actually saves states and their distribution companies the revenue. Research that eventually informed the world's largest solar irrigation program. Another young colleague then mapped out every single district on 20 parameters on where you'll get best return on investment. Another colleague went around looking at, along with me, I was still young then, in rural India, mapping out, where are the distributed energy companies delivering services. The point that Shamika said, right, even if you're locked in and locked down, you have the power and the agency to get comfortable. The pandemic was a non-linear event. And Shamika grabbed that and converted it into something that she could contribute. So I don't think we should be cherry-picking technologies or finance models or business models. We should simply be saying 50 weeks of action will define 2 weeks of negotiation, not the other way around.
Absolutely. And now with 5+ years in this space, this is what I experienced and this is what I learned through every conversation with you also, that sometimes change is sudden and fast-paced and passionate, but more often than not, change requires patience and is boring. But it's through conversations like this that slowly change takes place. And we have to see the clip of you in a band to formally give you the title. I look forward to that. I now want to move to Dia. Dia is she's a climate champion. She's a UN Secretary General's advocate for Sustainable Development Goals. She's one of the 100 most influential women and inspiring women as named by BBC. A lot of things, but most importantly, I have to tell you, in all the people who interacted with you, this is what I found in common. All of them talked about how kind and warm you are as a person. I think that's what matters the most. Earlier today, when we were talking about the future of India, you said you're excited to be alive in these times, but that is true if we make it through the pollution. So we have a long and difficult journey ahead of us to meet the Sustainable Development Goals. But again, it sounds so complex, and a lot of people believe it's for leaders and policymakers and scientists to take up. But we believe that any big transformation requires ordinary citizens to come in and participate. So how can we make these things relatable to the common man? How can we utilize media to get more and more young people to think about how they can contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals?
Thank you, Prachi. I'm, so excited because I've met so many of these fellows before and shared such energizing, wonderful moments with them, including you, Prachi. So I think some of what I said in my opening remarks have covered the answer. So I'll try and focus on the areas that I didn't speak about or touch upon. I recently met a professor who seeked me out and he said, I want to come and see you because I'm focused on behavioral science and I want to explore the possibility of how we can use the power of storytelling to bring about behavioral change, to create more champions for climate action. And I was like, you are the man. we have to meet, and I'm very, and so we met. And the outcome of that is going to be an entire, list of stories that we hope to tell. And these stories will be guided by the science to help us make storytelling that much more impactful and result in tangible change. I think the most complex and difficult thing to change is human behavior. And in so many parts of the country and the world, there is the unfortunate issue of the fact that there is one part of people who are ignorant to issues and are also ignorant towards solutions, so they don't know how to cope with or even respond to the challenges they're dealing with every day because they are just so deeply engaged in survival on a day-to-day basis. So they don't have the privilege of time. or the privilege of access, or the privilege or the benefit of that information that can help them engage and use their agency. Many of them go through the motions of life without even discovering that they have agency. So when we are communicating, and as communicators, I think it's so important for us to first recognize our privilege. We are so fortunate to be occupying spaces and living in these spaces that give us access to the information that we have, and therefore it is our responsibility to respond to that privilege and say, I have to make good on this. This is not just something that I have received because I've worked hard. It's something beyond that. And it is what makes who I am and my existence in this world more meaningful, because I have to use those tools, whatever I have, to bring wider change. And I want to tap into what Shamika said and what Arnava said, because I think this panel is an example of people who are a part of civil society, who've got different skill sets, but are tied in with this understanding that we are citizens of this planet, and our existence and our life is connected with the lives of everyone else. And what we do and do not do impacts everyone. And I'm going to try and simplify this a little more and say, I'm a mother of a 3-year-old child. And his first word was not mama or papa or ma or pa, it was tiger. And one of the first few things that I taught him was gratitude. So after every meal he says, thank you farmer, thank you mama earth. After his bath he says, thank you water, thank you mama earth. Now, these may seem or sound like just something a child says, but I do believe in the power of how these words will eventually help him recognize that his life, his livelihood, his existence is tied into the earth, and those that work with the earth every day. And that he develops the ability to respect all resources and not be wasteful. And then that understanding makes him a more conscious consumer. And eventually, if he chooses to produce something, whatever that may be, it's something that benefits all life on earth.
Amazing, wow. Amazing, grateful and conscious consumers. That is so powerful. I want to now turn to my future best friend. We met today. We met today. We're getting there.
We've met before.
So we're current best friends. So Richa is a UN Young Leader for Sustainable Development Goals. She is extremely cool also. And is the founder of Navya Foundation. And she is, very interestingly, a teacher turned entrepreneur. And I always like to, this is what I keep noticing, okay? 6 number in the impact space. You know, all young people who are doing something remarkable start at the age of 16. I unfortunately started at 18. So, but ever since I met you, I've been so excited to ask you about your journey, but we've been saving it for the panel. So now tell us all about why you do what you do, how you started, what you do, and let us be inspired.
Absolutely, thank you so much, Raji. And thank you everyone. I've actually successfully forgotten everything I had to say today because I was so engaged with what everyone had to share. But first and foremost, really grateful to you, to everyone here, to CEW, to the UN Foundation for having us and having a young person like me here today. As an educator, I'm extremely grateful that we have a space on the table. But I can quickly start with an anecdote and then with some data. So I'm a teacher turned entrepreneur. I started teaching in low-income communities when I was 16 and did that for about a decade. And I think slowly into my journey, learned many lessons, have so many incredible stories to tell. But I think the primary lesson I learned from being an educator in those classrooms was that there's a big difference between me teaching and children actually learning. And part of it could have been because I was a terrible teacher. But I think a more serious problem that I saw was that the kind of adversity that my children, my students came from, it was incredibly tough for them to be in the classroom and still be able to learn. And just being regulated enough to be okay to listen and understand and learn and assimilate what was happening in a high engaging classroom even was extremely difficult for so many of my children. And I think I started exploring that over the years, and I think a big turning point for me was, unfortunately in my journey, I lost two of my children, lost two of my students. And one of them was to community violence, another one was to a disease that I had recovered from when I was a child. And I think beyond how it affected me, I saw how the rest of my 48 children in the classroom dealt with it. These are 11, 12-year-old children who are only supposed to care about their next meal or who they want to play with and what they're going to do after school. But here they were trying to process the fact that they will never see their best friends ever again. And then I saw how it impacted their parents, the community that I served in, and it seemed like to the outside world, nothing really mattered. Like my children's names never came out, nothing of that sort, and mainly because of where they came from. And I think that really made me question my purpose. It made me question why education and what is the true purpose of education. And in that journey, I fortunately met with my co-founders, Vedant and Malika, who then pushed us to start what is now Labhya. And the whole point of Labhya is to build a movement for children's mental health and well-being. And so essentially what we recognized is that most of the children who go to public schools or government schools in India who come from really low income backgrounds, who come from vulnerable backgrounds, don't have the skills to build or don't have the resilience to be able to cope with where they are in the cycle of poverty and adversity and hence become effective learners. So how can we help children bridge that gap? How can children be regulated enough to then start learning? And so at Labhya we partner with Indian state governments to help them institutionalize well-being and mental health programs across government schools of the state mandatorily through a daily class that then goes on to impact children's resilience, their ability to build strong relationship skills, their ability to feel motivated to learn. So far we do this with 2.4 million children across 22,000 government schools in partnership with 3 state governments with a hope that we will but we have a long way to go. Our goal is 30 million children by 2030. I will not stop till we get there. I think that's been my journey, but I think the most important thing as a young entrepreneur I've learned in this journey is, like you were sharing, just take action. Don't wait for anything to happen for you. And the second is to not be afraid to engage with the public systems. As a young person, and I know one of the Next Gen fellows was sharing right before this that in most of the spaces you were, I don't know where you are, you were the youngest, yes, you were the youngest person in the room, and I completely empathize with that. It can be very daunting. I remember wearing fake specs, these are real, but I used to wear fake specs and saris and trying to be to pretend like I'm serious enough to be in the business. I'm serious enough to tell you what's the right thing to do in this situation. But I hope that more young people are able to adapt in those situations and really still engage with the system, where you can feel powerless many, many times, but know that your voice really matters, and more than your voice, your action, your intention, and your seriousness is the most important thing in the work that you do.
I was about to go shop for fake specs also, but but you showed us today that they are not required. So thank you so much for that. Thank you so much, all of you. It's been such an insightful, endearing panel, and with this, you become officially our godparents for the Next Generation India Fellowship. And now you're official. And all of you become a part of the Next Generation India movement as well, because we are more than a fellowship. We are an idea, a vision, and a movement. We are working with the mission that young people should not just be spectators, but should play an active role in shaping the future of our country. And the minute you start believing in this vision, you become a part of the Next Generation India Fellows. So thank you so much for coming here today. And as we wrap up this panel, we only have one thing to share with you and one thing to ask from you. We ask all of you that you believe. You believe in the power of your words. You believe in the power of your dreams, and you believe in the power of your action. And we share with you a vision for the world, a vision where each one of us is a change maker. Let's build that world together. Thank you so much.
So our audience is as energized as I am with this panel. Thank you so much to each and every one of you. We deeply appreciate your time and expertise. But I will not let you go so soon. We ask you to please stay on the stage, and I also request our speaker for the next segment, Wing Commander Rakesh Sharma, and the Next Generation India Fellow to join our esteemed panelists on the stage for